You're listening to the HOWL Holiday Special from NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing. I'm Ethan Shanty, and I'll be your host. Coming up, you're going to hear 5 stories from North Country folks. Some stories are outrageous, some are heartfelt, all about the holidays. We'll hear from Chris Locke, who decided to spend the holidays in a tropical location away from the snow and the cold of the North Country, only to find out that the locals really did not want him there. We're also going to hear from Alma Jean Porchette, whose family got an unexpected Christmas gift of skis, which kicked off a new holiday tradition. But before any of that, I'm going to tell you my story. The holidays are all about togetherness. When I was a kid, that wasn't really clear to me. Like a lot of kids in my generation, Christmas meant presents. I got Lego sets and Star Wars figures and VHS tapes. Later, I got CDs and DVDs and punk rock t-shirts and musical instruments. Every Christmas morning, I was excited to get up and see just how much stuff that my parents bought for me and my brothers. But as I got older, that changed, and I started to realize that I'd been thinking about the holidays all wrong. So this is the story of my last Christmas with my dad. We didn't have a lot of dogs growing up, but enough that I can match each one to a distinct part of my life. Tanya, she was a golden retriever who would always growl at my babysitter's husband. We had Katie. She was a little labradoodle who one time got stuck in the pool and swam all night long. They were the grade school dogs. In high school, we had Doofy. He was a gigantic black lab who would, without fail, smack his head on the underside of the kitchen table every time he stood up. I think he was my dad's favorite. And then when I was getting to the end of high school and into college, we had Reno, a golden lab who was just about the sweetest dog I think I've ever met. After Reno had to be put down, my dad was done with dogs for a long, long time. I think he just didn't have it in him anymore to lose more things that he cared about. By his mid-60s, he'd lost a lot of his friends and family. He became one of those people that was reading the obituary section of the paper every single day. But eventually, he started talking about getting a new dog. He'd call me on the phone and he'd say, "Hey, get on your computer and see if anyone around here has black labs." Occasionally, I would find one, but he'd always come up with a reason not to do it. Well, at the end of 2018, my dad had been going to the hospital a lot. First, he was having problems with his eyes. Then he had some stomach problems. His liver was damaged. It kind of became a long list. And I decided, I'm getting this guy a dog. That's what's going to cheer him up. It took a while, but I was finally able to track down somebody, just a few miles from my parents actually, who was selling lab puppies. I got some family members to chip in, and Christmas morning I gave my dad a box filled with a new dog collar, a new dish, some toys, and treats. The puppy was still a little too young to leave its mother at that point, but he'd be ready to go just a few weeks after Christmas. I wanted to be able to show my family who couldn't be there his reaction, so I started filming as he opened the box.
Yeah, that's good, but where the puppy goes with it?
Coming in 2 weeks?
You s***ing me.
No.
I tell you what, you made my Christmas.
Now, my dad did not cry very often, but he bawled his eyes out that Christmas morning. And when the dog finally did arrive, Dad named him Cooper, and they became friends for the time that they had left. So early in 2019, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. He didn't want to go through chemo. He'd already watched his brother and his sister go through that and have a horrible time in their last few months. So in the second week of June, he went in for surgery, and that was that. He spent the next 2 weeks in a coma, and on June 25th, he died. So 6 months later, to the day, that was Christmas. It was my first Christmas away from my parents' home. Actually, I was about as far away from home as you could get. Christmas morning, I woke up in the desert in Phoenix, Arizona, where my mom had moved to live with my brother. And it didn't much feel like Christmas that year. But in the years since, I've come to enjoy it a little bit more each year. I don't think about the presents anymore. I just try to think about that experience with my dad and that joy that I was able to bring him that one last time. And now I know what it's all about. It's about cooking together, even when that gets super stressful. It's about staying up late and watching old holiday movies. It's about looking to the year ahead, wondering how this year has already gone by so fast, and being thankful that you've had good people by your side the whole time. This year for Christmas, I'm welcoming my partner's family into my home for a few days. And by next year, we're going to have forgotten what we got each other for gifts. But we're going to remember that we started a tradition of watching Die Hard on TV after a couple of beers. We're going to laugh about our niece's wicked temper tantrum last Christmas. And we're going to count the days till we can all be together again. Without further ado, let's get on with the show. Our first story comes from Tanya Roy from Adams, New York. She's a regular on the HOWL stage and told us this one at the HOWL Grand Slam at Pickens Hall in Hewelton back in 2017.
I am from a very small family. I've only recently realized what it's like to be from a large family, and so to those of you who are from a large family, I would like to say, I'm so sorry. One of the many benefits of being from a small family is that I got my grandparents for every single holiday. There was no packing, there was no planning, there was no packing into my mom's station wagon, there was no over the river and through the woods. I got up on the holiday mornings, stayed in my pajamas, watched TV, and waited for my grandparents to arrive. It was awesome. When my grandparents pulled in, my sister and I would stumble over each other to get to the door yelling, "Nana, Papa, Nana, Papa," which I realize now as an adult is exceedingly annoying. And even though we were excited to see our grandparents, what we really wanted on the holidays was the picnic basket. My grandmother had this wooden weaved picnic basket that opened both sides to the middle. No one was allowed to touch the picnic basket except my grandmother and my grandfather when she let him. For years, I thought my grandfather's job was to carry the picnic basket from the house to the car and back again. My mom was not a great cook. Sorry, Mom. And so my grandmother's job was to bring that picnic basket full of all of the food that makes the holidays the holidays. My grandfather would set it down on the table, and my grandmother would open one side, and out would come Pyrex dishes full of homemade pickles, 2 kinds of sweet potatoes, candied yams, and always a mason jar full of some mysterious white liquid that somehow transformed turkey drippings into the world's best turkey gravy. That basket was like Mary Poppins' bag. No matter how many Pyrex dishes she pulled out of it, you knew there were more in the bottom, because nestled in the bottom were the pies. Every holiday, regardless of which one it was, I knew that there was a perfect lemon meringue pie sitting in the bottom of that picnic basket just for me. Now, in order to understand the rest of this story, you need to know a little something about my grandfather. Like many North Country men that I know, he didn't speak much. As a matter of fact, I heard him say 2 phrases from the time I was born till the time I left for college. When you would find an insect outside and bring it to him, he would say, "Oh my." And when you woke up in the morning from spending the night and you said, "Papa, can I have pancakes for breakfast?" he would say, "Let's just see about that." And that was all. So after my grandmother unloaded the basket to her content, she would go in the living room to visit with my father. My grandfather, that was his cue. He would wink, nod, point at the basket, and lift up one side, just enough so that you could get close and peer in. And as soon as your nose got close enough that he could catch it, he would let go and slam the lid shut. It's like that scene in Pretty Woman with the necklace and when she tries to reach for it and he closes the box on her fingers. I never got tired of that game, and he never once actually caught my nose. At the end of a meal, it was like the loaves and the fishes. That dinner became a refrigerator full of leftovers and a picnic basket full of packed Pyrex dishes, also containing leftovers. And out would go my grandfather. Picnic basket on one arm, grandmother on the other. My grandfather was the light of my life. I loved him very much. He was my best friend. As often happens, the picnic basket got misplaced. I never became the cook that my grandmother was, and so my picnic basket was actually 2 plastic grocery bags full of food from the bakery. My grandfather didn't live to see me graduate from college. He didn't live to see me get married or have kids, and he didn't live to see my marriage fall apart. That was a hard Christmas. When my girls and I decided to head out on our own, we had enough money for a tree, but we weren't allowed to take our Christmas ornaments. No baby's first Christmas. No reindeer antlers made with finger paint in kindergarten. and I couldn't afford to buy new ornaments. So I sent a message out to all of my friends, pleading with them that if they had extra ornaments, could we please borrow them just for one Christmas? The next day I came home, and sitting on the front steps, miraculously, had appeared my grandmother's picnic basket. Inside was a note from a woman I had not spoken to in many years. She said she had brought in ornaments, and she was afraid they would break. So she dug in my garage until she found the picnic basket and put them inside so they'd be safe. Just like all those food items all those years ago, as we started to hang the ornaments on the tree, we realized there were far more ornaments than that basket should have held. That year, my 7-year-old wanted one thing for Christmas. She wanted a kitten. And my landlord had decreed we could not have pets. Christmas morning came, and I knew I would have a very disappointed 7-year-old. After the presents were opened, no one had told her that the basket shoved in the back wasn't actually a gift, and she pulled it out. As she reached for it, one side of the lid popped up, and as her fingers got closer, it snapped back down. At first, I thought I must be seeing things. But after the 4th or 5th time that she giggled because it kept snapping on her fingers, completely unbidden and outside of my own free will, I said, "Oh my, let's just see about that." We opened up one side, and out crawled a tiny tiger kitten. Somehow, with the help of my mother and the magic Christmas basket, that letter had gotten waylaid on its way to the North Pole and ended up in my landlord's mailbox. I realized that that basket is full of Christmas magic, but I realized something more that day. On that holiday, regardless of what comes out of the basket, because of it, we are all full of love.
That was Tanya Roy, live on stage at Pickens Hall in Hewelton in 2017. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll have more of the HOWL Holiday Special. This is NCPR. Welcome back to the HOWL Holiday Special here on NCPR. I'm Ethan Shanty, and right now we're sharing holiday stories. I know I said that earlier, Christmas presents don't really matter, but in this case, well, there wouldn't really be a story without presents. Alma Jean Porchette got on stage and told us about how a pair of skis changed her family's holiday tradition.
In order to fully appreciate my story, you have to imagine me 35 years younger and a lot thinner. My story begins in the holidays, the Christmas Thanksgiving era of 1987. We had just finished Thanksgiving dinner and the tryptophan turkey malaise was taking over when my husband said, "I think we should buy cross-country skis for the family for Christmas." I was so tired. If we're going to buy skis, I want downhill. I want gravity to do most of the work. But he was undaunted, and so we bought cross-country skis for the family for Christmas. We brought them home, wrapped them up, hid them away, and then eagerly anticipated Christmas morning. It arrived. The kids came racing down the stairs to the living room, recognized immediately, even though they were wrapped, that they were skis, and seemed really, really excited until they looked out the French doors in the living room and Jonathan said, "But where's the snow?" It had been a very cold winter, And we'd had flurries, but nothing had accumulated. And so here we had this wonderful ski package for all of us, and we couldn't use them. My husband at the time was in the antiques restoration business, and he had a couple of deliveries to make the next day, and while he was out, he was listening to the radio. And he heard an ad for Bristol Mountain Ski Resort. Now remember, this is 1987. You could have a lesson, rent skis, and a 4-hour pass for $25. He called on the phone and he said, "I'm going skiing. I'll see you when I see you." We were sitting at the supper table when the door burst open. He came in, threw his hat and gloves on the island in the center of the kitchen and said, "It's better than sex." Our 7-year-old went, "Ew, Daddy." Our 14-year-old bowed his head toward his plate and sat there with his nose 4 inches from the potatoes and said nothing for the rest of the night. Doug backtracked and tried to explain what a great time he'd had, and finally convinced us, because in the next couple of days we were off to Bristol to take those $25 ski lesson rentals and passes. We took the lesson, and it took the kids about 15 seconds to feel comfortable on the hill, and they and Doug disappeared, and I stayed behind on the beginner's hill, wondering what had ever possessed me when I said I wanted downhill skis. I did improve slowly but surely. I took 2 or 3 more lessons. The instructors kept telling me that there were other ways to slow down and turn besides snow plowing. And I said, well, figure it out and help me get so that I can do it, because my inner thighs are killing me. I finally decided to go down Infinity, which was a trail with a mild grade and 1 curve. I called it a hairpin. My kids mocked me, but a hairpin is one that turns back on itself, and this one did. I decided I would go down Infinity, not snow plowing once. And I did, all the way around the curve, where I saw about 100 feet ahead of me 14 or 15 little 4- and 5-year-old kids who had stopped to have a chat in the middle of the trail. Now, condense this next process into about a nanosecond. I am the skee ball, I am the bowling ball, they are the pins, and we're going to have a strike any second. I threw myself in the most colossal snowplow that has ever been performed on any ski trail in any place in the world. When I woke up, I heard this little voice say, "Lady, lady, are you dead? Lady!" When I opened my eyes, I scared him so badly he fell on my chest, which compounded the problem that my left ski was vertical and my knee was twisted grotesquely because my binding didn't release. So much for parallel skiing and snowplows and the whole shot, I thought to myself. But the little kid said, "Can we help you? Can we help you?" There wasn't an adult in sight, and so I said with great trepidation, "Can you release my bindings?" It took 3 of them, after many tugs, jerks, and pulls, but finally the binding was released. I assured them I was okay and shooed them down the hill. I gathered my skis, got up on my knees, crawled to the edge of the trail, pulled myself up by the tree branches, ascertained that nothing was broken, and made my way gingerly to the bottom of the hill. I didn't give up. I did go back. I went back for several years. I still liked Infinity best, but I got better, and my kids always said to me, "Mom, you're a much better skier than you think you are." And I would listen to that. And then I would get on the lift and go to Comet and North Star and wish I'd never been born. One trail I promised myself I would never attempt was up a rocket. When you stood at the ski lodge and looked up to the top of Upper Rocket, you had to stand like this. It was worse at the top. They convinced me to get on the lift. I rode to the top, got off the lift, and looked down and said, there are only two ways to get down this hill. One is to get back on the lift and ride down, which my pride wouldn't let me do, and the other was to ski down. I was scared spitless, and I said spitless. But I began my descent. I found out that there were three ways to get down Upper Rocket. The third way was in a basket suspended between two members of the ski patrol who were shaking their heads and rolling their eyes and saying, "Can you believe it? I wonder if she'll ever learn." I still didn't give up, but I never did go up Upper Rocket again. We had other skiing excitements, and one of them was taking a bus all the way to Utah to ski while our son was a freshman in college at Brigham Young University. We must have stopped at 11,000 towns between New York and Salt Lake City, and at one of those stops, one of the persons who got on the bus and sat down by my husband was in for a real treat because Doug tried to engage him in conversation, and he said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm on Christmas parole. They let me out, and I have to be back in 4 days." That was the end of that conversation. You know, skiing was really good for our family. Our kids who had been at loggerheads could now, one was 7, one was 14, they could now ski together because she was as good as he was. We had a wonderful time together. It was exhilarating, exciting, extraordinary, but I must confess, as spectacular as it was, skiing never was or never will be better than sex.
That was Alma Jean Porchette, live on stage in 2017 at the HOWL Grand Slam. You're listening to the HOWL Holiday Special on NCPR, which is supported by listeners of this station. Everything that we do here at North Country Public Radio is funded directly by the people who listen. If this is the first time that you're hearing the HOWL and you're enjoying it, consider making a holiday gift to us by visiting ncpr.org/give. And by the way, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast version of this show presented by NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing. I'm the host of that too. We're between seasons right now, but if you go to Spotify or Google or Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find more than 40 episodes of regional stories. And if you're planning any more holiday travel, you're in luck because there's 10 hours of stories throughout those 40 episodes, and there's even more HOWL. Give yourself an extra holiday gift by signing up for the HOWL newsletter. Each week I'm sharing new stories of my own and sometimes from other folks, and I'll give you some great music recommendations and a lot more. Sign up for the HOWL newsletter and find the podcast ncpr.org. All right, let's get to another story. Chris Locke wanted to spend Christmas someplace where he wouldn't be freezing to death. So he and his girlfriend traveled to Honduras. He was loving the heat and the scenery, but the locals were not happy to see him. Here's Chris Locke, live on stage at the HOWL Grand Slam in 2019.
Hello. Now, I'm guessing when you picture a tiny, isolated Caribbean island, you're thinking sun, sand, a couple palm trees, maybe a drink in a blender, and not death and dismemberment, right? Show of hands, probably not, right? So my girlfriend Lisa and I were backpacking through Central America for 6 months. And when we got to Honduras, we decided we wanted to spend Christmas on Utila Island, this tiny little island right off the north coast of Honduras. We've been told that it's the cheapest place in the world to get PADI certified so you can dive, and hotels are $5 a night. Perfect. So we take the puddle jumper over from the mainland, land on the island, a little dirt strip. 6 or 7 other travelers get off with us. We all get our backpacks, start walking down the one road toward the center of town. I met this German dude on the plane, about 6'5", long blonde dreadlocks, Hello Kitty t-shirt, dirty Birkenstocks. Yeah, I can't wait to try all the pineapple. I decided not to tell them they don't actually grow that. But anyway, we're getting towards the center of town, and there's this little square there. And there are all these chairs around the square where some older folks were sitting, like parents and grandparents, like they're waiting for a parade. And in the middle of the square, there are about 5 boys aged probably 13 to 18, all shirtless, beaming, smiling. And I'm thinking, they're coming to greet us. They're coming to welcome us to their homeland. And that's when I heard the first explosion. And then the second. It was like some demented welcome wagon. They had these half sticks of dynamite wrapped in purple paper, and they're lighting the fuse, and they're throwing them at us. Everybody panicked. It was insane. We ran in different directions. And I can't overstate how powerful these bombs were. They would hit you like this hot shout, almost knocking you over. Lisa and I ducked and dodged and ran. And finally, we got through the square and ran about another quarter kilometer till we got to our inn, Ruby's Inn. When I got there, I found Ruby, and I said, "What the was that?" She was a pretty down-to-earth woman. And she said, maybe there's letting off some steam, I don't know. Well, so in the next few days, what we realized, we needed to stay on that side of the island. And we did our best to do that and still try to have a good time. But every day a new flight would come in, and new travelers would get off, and they'd have to run the gauntlet too. And when we'd see them come to Ruby's, they'd have that same fear in their eyes. We're like, oh yeah, I actually remember that. And it was awful. But Christmas comes. It's Christmas Eve. And, the travelers and I and Lisa, we decided that we're just going to have a big party, a big blowout. Sorry for the pun. But we want it to be really fun. So I get a bunch of fish from a local fisherman. I grill it up. We drink a lot of rum. And then a friend of mine, Clark, who we'd been traveling with for about a month, had his hand behind his back. And he goes, "Hey, partner, Merry Christmas." And he handed me one of those purple bombs. Now, thankfully, it wasn't lit. That's the good thing. But we both laughed, getting the joke. And I took it, and I put it in my shorts pocket right here. And then he proceeded to take out this big-ass rocket, like something Wile E. Coyote would have, except it didn't have Acme written on the side. And he goes, "Let's go down to the beach and blow this up." It's a great idea. So we decide to circumvent the boys, and we make our way drunkenly over the dark rocks, stumbling and falling. And we finally get to this little cove. And there are a few boys there, locals, 8 or 9 years old. They're throwing out firecrackers. And I'm watching Clark set the rocket up. And that's when I hear the unmistakable sound of a Bic lighter. And then I hear it again. And then I look down and see a little hand lighting the fuse in my pocket. It was the most intense concussion explosion that I've ever heard or experienced. And after it died down, I heard the boy go, "That's what you get, man." And all the boys ran away. My shirt was on fire. My shorts were blown off, so now I'm naked from the waist down. And Clark picks up my shorts, and I'm putting out the flames. He told me to wrap the shorts around my waist, which I did. And he said, "I'm going to go get Lisa. Just hang tight." So I'm sort of like standing there in a total stupor. Lisa shows up and she said, "What happened?" There's blood running down my leg. And there's these 2 massive burns here and here. But what I didn't know at the time, and I found out later, is that when the bomb blew up, it blew out at the seams. So it blew this way and that. If it had been turned 45 degrees more in, it would have blown in and out. And I would have bled out on a Honduran beach on Christmas Eve. "We need to get you help," she said. So we went to look for the nurse. We went to the clinic, and I'm walking behind Lisa, trying to do the best I can, but I look like this extra from Night of the Living Dead. I'm holding my shorts, and I'm all burnt, and my hair is just like gunpowder on my face. She's not at the clinic. She's at the church for the midnight mass. We find her. She says, "I'm sorry, I don't have the key." We're like, "Who has the key?" She says, "The other nurse." We're like, "Where's the other nurse?" She's like, "On the mainland. There are no boats. There are no planes coming when we're trapped." But Lisa and I do have a med kit back at the hotel. But that means we gotta go through the center of town again. I'm never gonna make it. I'm a sitting duck. I can't walk, let alone run. So Lisa leads the way. I'm doing my best to keep up. And then the boys see us. And I know it's over. But Lisa sticks out her chest. She goes right up to me. She goes, hey, no, put that thing down. It was the most courageous thing I've ever seen in my life. And they parted like the Red Sea. They just let us through. The only time they never attacked any travelers in that little square. So we made it to the hotel. We found the med pack. Patched me up, cleaned it up, started taking some antibiotics that night. And the thing is, before we left from the United States, I had been telling Lisa, you don't need to pack that thing. We're not going to need it. Please. Not the first time I was wrong. Definitely not the last time that I was wrong. But I decided I wanted to start making better choices. I wanted to be right more often instead of wrong. We got off the island, got to Guatemala, and I made the right choice. And I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. So we went out to celebrate, had a few beers, met these travelers from Denmark. They too just got back from Utila. I asked them how they handled the bombs. Like, how'd you deal with that? They said, some American guy got blown up. They're now illegal. Stupid American. I was like, right, stupid American. Thank you.
That was Chris Locke live on stage at the HOWL Grand Slam back in 2019. Let's take a break, and when we come back, 2 more stories to close out the show, including a story from Deirdre Loftus about how even though they didn't always see eye to eye on things, her dad encouraged her to fight for what she thought was right. This is NCPR. You're listening to North Country Public Radio. I'm Ethan Shanty, and this is the HOWL Holiday Special, sharing holiday stories recorded live on stage here in the North Country. I want to let you know that this show is made possible through a collaboration between us, that's NCPR, and the Adirondack Center for Writing in Saranac Lake. Every year, we're hosting about a dozen live story slams at venues and bars around the North Country, and it's our way of collecting kind of the hidden history of the North Country. When we hear these stories, we get to know our friends and our neighbors and our region a little bit better. That's why I love doing it. So come on out to one of those story slams. Tell us your story. You'll find all the details at ncpr.org/howl. And you can learn more about the Adirondack Center for Writing and their commitment to storytelling by visiting adirondackcenterforwriting.org. All right, let's hear from Al Lutz from Plattsburgh. This story is a bit of a difficult one to hear and involves discussion of mental health and suicide, so listener discretion is advised. Here's Al Lutz, live on stage in 2017.
So this is a story about Christmas in my family. And we don't have a whole lot of holiday traditions. We have 3. One is that we always put out the same neon Kmart tablecloth for birthdays. The second is we always go to my grandma's house in August. And the third is we always go to the same steakhouse on Christmas Eve for dinner. Always the same waiter, Tom. He serves us, usually wearing the same candy cane tie. Very nice guy. My dad always has a few too many scotches. And then we go home. And this is a story about how I kind of ruined one of those traditions. And I think you can figure out which one it is. But in order to talk about this Christmas, I have to rewind a little bit to October of 2012, when I met who I thought was my soulmate. And I didn't expect to meet Charlie. He had kind of crashed this little reunion I was planning with some of my friends from college. And he was the kind of guy who could do math equations in his head, but really couldn't tell you what day of the week it was. Totally my type. So and he was from Montana, and we met totally by happenstance. I was living in Maine that fall, and we kept up a correspondence. We talked through email and Skype, and if any of you have corresponded with someone for a long time over email and Skype, it's really easy to fall in love. And that's because you can kind of present your best self, right? And they can present their best self, and you can edit emails, which is great, a lot less pressure than conversation. But around Thanksgiving, so about a month and a half into our communication, I decided that I wanted to see him again. So I said, hey, I'm going to fly out to Montana to see you. And he said, no. Don't fly to see me in Montana. Let's both go somewhere we've never been before. Let's go to Seattle. And I said, okay. So, always one for an adventure. I booked a flight to Seattle, and the return flight was on Christmas Eve. And I thought, it'll be fine. I'll get home in time. We'll be able to make it to the butcher block. I'll get my salad because I'm a vegetarian, but it doesn't matter. So I made Charlie promise me, I'm like, listen, when we get to Seattle, I better see you in the airport waiting for me. He's like, oh, yeah, of course, I'll be there. So I get to the airport, and he is not waiting for me. And I think to myself, I just flew across the country to meet someone I have known for 8 hours. And I'm also going to ruin 33% of the Lutz family holiday traditions. This is great. Definitely worth it. But it turns out he had been in a car accident on his way from Montana, driving in the snow through the mountains, right? So he spent all night in a truck stop and drove starting at 1 o'clock the next morning, and he met me at our hostel in Seattle, and we had this whirlwind romance, right? 10 days in our own blissful little bubble, falling in love, gallivanting around the Pacific Northwest in the middle of December, which surprisingly is not the number one tourist destination. Very cold and rainy. And by the time we said goodbye, I was just high on this feeling of falling in love, right? He was everything I imagined he would be through emails and more. And because I was kind of high on this feeling of love, right, my plane touched down in Burlington, and I got off my flight. It was around dinner time, 6:30, and my parents were waiting for me. There was my mom, there was my dad, and for the first time, I kind of looked at my dad, and I saw that he had gotten a lot older since the last time I had seen him, which was really only a few weeks earlier at Thanksgiving. And he was walking with a cane, and, he had been struggling a lot with mental health issues. And for some reason, in that moment, I kind of saw him as a person who was getting sick. And I think it was because I had had that 10 days of magic, absurdity with Charlie that I was able to really see my dad in a new light and have patience with him. And of course, on the ride home, I realized not only have I ruined our tradition of not going to the steakhouse on Christmas Eve, I also forgot to buy my family Christmas presents. Yeah, this story does not paint me in a very flattering light. But we get home and we do our Christmas Eve dinner a little more subdued at home. We all go to bed, and the next morning we wake up and we open presents, or I guess my family opened IOUs from me. But I promised all of them that when I got back to Maine, I would mail them their presents as soon as possible, or as soon as I got them. And the last present I opened was from my mom, who's sitting in the back, and it was a little yellow pouch in the shape of a banana, and it was the game Bananagrams. And if any of you have ever played Bananagrams, it's very fast-paced, very competitive. It's like Scrabble. You build your own crossword. And my dad was never really one for board games unless they involved world domination and lasted for 5 days. But I looked at him and I said, I see you've all played Risk as well. Or Settlers of Catan. But I looked at my dad, who normally I kind of did my best to avoid. Very different opinions politically, very hard to have a conversation. But I kept thinking about that moment the night before in the airport when he was walking with his cane, and I thought, here's my dad, and I owe it to him to be patient and to have this moment and to play this game. And I guess my Christmas present to him was that I didn't keep score. But I said, you know what, let's help each other. Let's build words together. Let's just have fun. Let's just play a fun game. So we played bananagrams at my dining room table, and it just felt very sweet, and it was the first time we really connected as people in a long time, in years. And I flew out back to Maine on New Year's Day, gave my dad a hug, said I love you, told my mom I loved her, and I said, of course, I'll mail my presents as soon as I get back. Well, I was working at a school at the time, and, the school year picked up again, and things got really busy, and I never ended up getting my family Christmas presents because I always figured I would have time. I'll find the perfect present, right? But it turns out I didn't really have time because a few days before Valentine's Day, I got a call from my mom saying that my dad had lost his battle with mental illness and he had taken his life. And I felt an incredible amount of guilt and shame thinking about that tradition, right, that we hadn't had. That was our last Christmas together. The gifts I hadn't bought. But then I remembered, no, we spent time together. And even though from the outside looking in, a little game of bananagrams doesn't seem like a big deal, right? It's something really small. But those are the moments that the holidays are really about. It's not about presents. In some ways, it's not even really about tradition. It's about spending time with someone and loving them and being patient and forgiving them and connecting. And I guess moving forward, when I think to myself, oh, I'll have time, I always catch that little voice in the back of my head and think, no, you might not have time. Send that card, buy that present, say I love you, book that trip across the country, And never, ever undervalue the time that you're spending with loved ones. Thank you.
That was Al Lutz with an important reminder to make every moment count with your family this holiday season. We're going to take one more quick break, and then when we get back, our last story with Deirdre Loftus. This is the HOWL Holiday Special on NCPR. Welcome back. You're listening to the HOWL Holiday Special on NCPR. I'm your host, Ethan Shanty. I want to thank you so much for tuning in and choosing to make NCPR a part of your holiday. It means a lot that you stuck around and enjoyed with us the wonderful tradition that is storytelling. Thanks so much for being here. We've got one more story to go, so let's get to it. Here's Deirdre Loftus, live on stage at the HOWL Grand Slam in Hewelton.
My favorite tradition growing up at Christmas time was that every year Santa would leave a book at the foot of our beds, my siblings and I, for us to wake up on Christmas morning and have this immediate gift. There was this notion that Santa came into our room the night before, he knows who we are, he knows his way around our house. Very cool. He doesn't do this for every family, especially cool. And we were told every year, now remember, when you wake up in the morning, stay in your room, open your book, read your book, read your book to each other, then come in and wake us up to go downstairs and open gifts. So, let us sleep longer. So as rituals began to change, as we got older, Santa retired from leaving books at the bottom of our bed. We had gotten a little bit old. He had lots of other kids to go to deliver gifts at their houses. So my dad took up the responsibility of picking out the books that we got and putting the books at the base of our bed. This remains to be his favorite thing to do at Christmas. It remains to be our favorite thing, our favorite gift to receive. It's one of our favorite traditions as a family. So one year when I was in middle school, I remember waking up on Christmas morning and I opened my book and I received the book Animal Factory, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a book about the meat industry, the terrible things that happen in the meat industry, animal maltreatment. Y'all have seen documentaries. It's not a book that a middle schooler would be like, please buy me this. That looks amazing. And I remember being kind of bummed at first. And then I opened up the book, and on the inside, my dad had inscripted, to my activist, love, Dad. Now, at this point in my life, when I think back on it, I don't remember having any opinions that were my own. I don't remember doing anything that made me seem like an activist, right? Something about me, though, told my upper-class, conservative, Christian, white, Republican father that this kid was going to be different. So I read the book, immediately became a vegetarian, and he said to me, he would say to me, now, do you want meatballs with dinner tonight? And I'd be like, Dad, no, I'm an activist, remember? No. And he'd say, okay, whatever you want to do, that's fine. And I have all of these, little memories like that scattered into my brain throughout my childhood and in my adulthood. I remember I had to write a paper on an influential person in history. And my dad said, who are you writing your paper on? And I said, I'm writing my paper about Christopher Columbus, who was a rapist and a murderer, and we should change the day to honor someone who did some good for the world. And whoa, thank you. And my dad said, Christopher Columbus discovered America. And I said, no, Dad, I'm an activist. Let me write this paper. And he'd say, okay, just do your research. And then I remember when I was in college, I called him and I said, Dad, I found out that the local police department at the school I went to is under federal investigation for racially profiling racially profiling churches, people coming out of churches in high populations of Hispanic communities. And they are checking people's green cards and their identification. And they're deporting people on their way out of church. Isn't that crazy? What are your opinions on immigration, Dad? And he said, you're not going to agree with my opinions on immigration. Do something about it, though, if you're mad about it. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be an activist. You're right. And these memories, they continued to happen. Conversations where I'd be like, what do you think, Dad? And he'd be like, you know what I think. Continue to do your research. Do what you want about it. And then as I got older, this trend didn't change. I called my dad after college, I was with my dad after college on a road trip, and I got a call that I received a job working for Planned Parenthood in the Adirondacks. And I remember not being sure what my dad would think about that, not having had conversations with him about that organization. And I was like, Dad, what do you think? Should I take the job? And he said, don't listen to anyone in our family, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles. Don't listen to anyone who tells you not to take this job. You do what you think is right. And I was like, Dad, yeah, okay. So I took the job. And his opinion, I mean, he continues to be very different than me, right? So I still get a little bit nervous to have conversations with him. We have incredible conversations all of the time about politics and social issues and all of these things that lead to some intense arguments sometimes, and sometimes a mind changing. And I remember going to the Women's March and thinking, I was driving down to D.C., and I made a conscious decision not to tell my parents. And I said, I'll just tell them when I'm back. They probably I don't know what their opinions are on protesting. I don't know what their thoughts are on this. And my dad called me and he said, hey, are you marching? And I was like, yeah, Dad, I am. And he was like, good, because you're an activist now. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Thank you. So I don't know what it was about me as a child that made him see me as this person. And I don't have any children of my own to know what it's like to know what a person is and who a person is before they are conscious of knowing who they are and what they are. But I do know that on that Christmas morning when I was in middle school, my dad, with that book and with that inscription, gave me permission to be exactly who I am and exactly who he knew I was always going to be. And for that, I am forever grateful to him. Thank you.
That's going to do it for this show, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in to the HOWL Holiday Special from NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing. I'm Ethan Shanty. If you enjoyed the program, you can find even more stories on the HOWL podcast. More than 10 hours worth of stories recorded live on stages all over the North Country. You can also get more stories with the HOWL newsletter delivered directly to your email every week. Sign up at ncpr.org. This show was written, produced, and edited by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. David Summerstein is my script supervisor. Doyle Dean is our production manager and recorded some of those stories as they happen live. Bill Hanel is our Director of Digital Services. Caitlin Kelly manages our social media, and the live story slams are made possible by our station manager Mitch Tyke and Natalie Phil, who's the Director of the Adirondack Center for Writing in Saranac Lake. Our theme music that you heard at the top of the hour is by famous letter writer of Plattsburgh, and all of the holiday music that you heard this hour is by Danny Gotham and Barb Heller. Don't forget that you can support this show and everything that happens at NCPR by making a gift at ncpr.org/give. And thanks. And happy holidays from all of us here at North Country Public Radio. For NCPR, I'm Ethan Shanty. This is The HOWL.